Today, I want to talk to you about the importance of always praying and never losing heart. And I'm going to read to you a verse from Luke chapter 18, verse 1, where Jesus said this. Then he spoke a parable to them that men always ought to pray and not lose heart. Well, actually, those weren't the words of Jesus, but it's a verse right before the words of Jesus. You see, in Luke chapter 18, Jesus told a story of a widow who came to an unjust judge seeking justice in a legal dispute. The judge, though he did not regard God or man, he eventually gave the widow justice because of her persistent requests. And Jesus ended that parable with this application: shall God not avenge his own elect who cry out day and night to him, though he bears long with them? Again, that's later on in Luke chapter 18. Now, it's easy to lose heart in prayer because it's hard work. In Colossians chapter 4, verse 12, Paul praised a man named Epaphras because he was always laboring fervently in prayers. You see, Paul knew that prayer required fervent labor. It's easy to lose heart in prayer because the devil hates prayer. If prayer were powerless, it would be a lot easier to pray. And then thirdly, it's easy to lose heart in prayer because we are not always convinced of the reality of prayer's power. You see, prayer too often becomes a last resort instead of a first resource. Despite the many reasons why it is easy to lose heart in prayer, we, as Jesus tells us, we always ought to pray. Now, in the parable that Jesus goes on to explain in Luke chapter 18, the only reason that the judge gave the woman what she wanted was that she wouldn't stop bugging him. In the wording of the ancient Greek, he complained, the judge that is, that the woman was beating him or stunning him with her persistence. So eventually, the judge answered her request. You see, this parable has a unique approach. Obviously, God is not an unjust judge. But if the unjust judge will answer a persistent request, how much more will a righteous God answer a persistent request? Charles Spurgeon said this, quote, "Too many prayers are like the boy's runaway knocks at a door, given, and then the giver is away before the door can be opened." The woman in Luke chapter 18 had to overcome the judge's reluctance to help. Now, we often feel that we must also overcome God's reluctance by our persistence, but this misses the point of the parable entirely. Jesus did not say that men always ought to pray and not lose heart because God is reluctant, but because he isn't reluctant. Delays in answered prayer are not needed to change God, but to change us. You see, persistence in prayer brings a transforming element into our lives, building into us the character of God himself. You see, some promises of God take a long time to fulfill. Will we persevere in trusting God and keep on praying? George Mueller was a remarkable man of faith who ran orphanages in England. In a sermon he preached when he was 75 years old, George Mueller said that 30,000 times in his 54 years as a Christian, he had received an answer to prayer on the same day that he prayed it. But not all his prayers were answered so quickly. Mueller told of one prayer that had been brought to God about 20,000 times over 11 and a half years. And he was still trusting God for the answer. Mueller said this, "I hope in God, I pray on and look for the answer. Therefore, beloved brethren and sisters, go on waiting upon God. Go on praying." You know, I believe that that's God's word to you today. Just like George Mueller said, go on praying, knowing that God answers prayer.